Okay, let's start. So this is the session where we are going to discuss how we started testing Spira test with Rapise. This project started a few months ago, and we came a long way, and we want to tell you the story of how it all happened. I'm Dennis. I'm from Team Rapise, and at Inflectra, I'm doing many Rapise activities, doing development, support, and also webinars. So I'm involved in almost every part of Rapise life at Inflectra. And today with me, we have Sriram and Alexei. So I will let them introduce themselves. Sriram?
Hi, thanks, Dennis. My name is Sriram Rajgopalan. I am an enterprise agile evangelist at Inflectra. In Inflectra, I do a number of things, but primarily focus on Spira team, Spira plan, and Spira test training for a lot of customers, and also do business process consultation. And I'm quite excited about this particular session because this demonstrates a very good story of how we are using our own tools to test our own products. I will let Alexei introduce himself now.
Thanks, Sriram. My name is Alexei. I'm from Inflectra, from Rapise team, and I'm involved in many activities around Rapise development.
Okay, so to summarize our roles in this project, Sriram is a domain expert and he knows Spira test very well. He knows all the artifacts and how to work within the system. Alexei is an expert in Rapise itself. He knows the tool the better than everyone else. And I'm mostly doing frameworks and trainings for Rapise, and I know how to apply Rapise in automation projects. And these different roles that we have in this project help us to progress. So let's try to remember how it all started. I was not involved at the beginning of this project. So Sriram, can you tell us how it all started?
Of course, definitely. Thanks, Dennis. So Adam and I had a discussion. Adam is the main founder and director of Inflectra, and he started having a discussion with me asking, Sriram, how about we do some automated routine testings of Spira test? And as part of my role, I was also doing some testing of some new functionality and new features, and repeatedly were getting involved in testing some elements that could be automated. And so I had similar thoughts, Adam had similar thoughts. So we said, like, okay, Sriram, why don't you get started on this? And honestly speaking, although I have good understanding of the Spira domain, I had zero understanding of the Rapise domain. And I was wondering, like, okay, beware of what you speak because you will get it. And I got it. And so I was trying to figure out how to read all the different documentations and many things that Rapise had. And I was not going too much. I was able to do a few things here and there, but I was not able to move forward at the level that this particular initiative really worked. So that's when I started putting together an implementation plan. Because to me, if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. And so I put together a list of requirements as to how it should be done, what should be the basic setup, how we should move forward testing it, and things of that nature. And the sky started falling apart on me, and I had to reach out to Alexei and Dennis and said, help me here. And that's when they involved and gave me some more context, did some training to me. And I will first let Alexei speak in terms of what was the focus of the initial training, and then how I involved more with Dennis in terms of how we moved forward.
Before we proceed to the training, the interesting part that we probably need to touch is what is your experience in scripting and in automation? So we know you're a professor in methodologies, in agile, in all the management stuff, but we also considered it as an experiment that we did internally, where you needed to like learn Rapise from the beginning and see how it, since we know you're very experienced and very well educated, we wanted to see how you may pick it up and use it for testing the product. So the question is, what is your experience in scripting and in automation?
So my question, it's a very good question, because I had done some amount of scripting before, but I had not done any kind of automation. Most of my automations were primarily related to writing a few macros here and there, or running some simple things that are already available. But automation is a different beast altogether, and I did not have any experience at all.
Yeah, that agrees with our experience and what we feel about automation. That it looks similar, but it's really different from like usual scripting or macro design. Okay, so what did you have as an initial plan? So what did you start from? What kind of document or like piece of paper or just something in your mind? So what was in the beginning as a source for?
Yeah, very good. So when I originally started, I had a very big laundry list of, I would like to automate that. I would like to automate this. I can automate the user administration. I can create a requirements module. I can create this test case management. So many different things I was thinking. But Alexei, I will be very honest, because you really kept me on the hooks in terms of, Sriram, not everything that can be automated should be automated. So that was a very powerful statement you said that I still remember. And it helped me go back to my drawing board and say, okay, what is the minimum viable product? In other words, what is the minimum thing that we should automate so that it gives return on investment in terms of productivity improvement and throughput? So it's not necessarily at the end of the day, what are all the things that I think I can do? It's what are all the things that we can actually do that will increase the cost of our work. So, and then I started developing I started iterating through this whole process in an agile approach, and I started going through, okay, what are the basic things that we should do? In other words, logging in, logging out, and then iterated to one more to say, okay, I logged in, I did add a user, change the roles of the user, added them to a particular product, logged out. And that's how I started developing one by one. So once I started feeling comfortable with that element alone, I felt like, okay, I can move on to the next aspect, and started building a backlog of things that I wanted to do in a priority order.
And once we had the first session with you, when you started implementing your test plan and started implementing scenarios, in the beginning, we tried the first approach with Rapise, where we were trying to solve all issues using Rapise own features without writing code, without doing JavaScript, just by fixing objects and by fixing XPath whenever possible, using SPI and so on. Probably it makes sense to look at Spira screen at this point and show some maybe interesting points.
Okay, while we are talking, I will open Spira.
So Spira is designed as a set of grids or set of tables. And besides the usual forms where you have a number of input fields, in many cases, it has shortcuts where you enter data right into the grid. So it's in-place editing style. And for automation, grids and in-place editors are usually a bit tricky beasts, because in place is harder is harder than usual input field.
Yeah, this is right. So I remember that when I first entered this project and started talking with you about what is happening during testing, I found out that the trickiest part was working with this very, very complex grid or table in Spira, because there were many steps like click on a specific cell in a row, choose something from the drop down, because in Spira you may edit a row and you may need to enter some values into fields, select something from the drop down. And since there were no built-in support in Rapise for this specific grid, it took so many time to use workarounds and work with this grid without any special custom functions in Rapise. Though it was doable, I saw this bottleneck, and this is why when I started working with Sriram and Alexei, first thing I did those functions that made interaction with this grid easier. And those functions implied that you do not do recording of this table, but you simply manually add steps to the test that interact with this grid. So let's try to find some test in our testing framework that contains a grid interaction. All right, so here we go. So this is the part that works with the table. And here we call functions from the library that was created to speed up Spira test testing. And these are the functions like Spira table, set value, and others. So I will probably include some slide here that will show.
Maybe you may switch to object tree.
Yeah,
object tree and show functions.
Object tree.
And user
functions are here. And these are all the functions created so far. And we have many more functions besides created for table operation. And those functions were created later in this project. If we will open our main test in the Spira testing framework, you may see that it is designed from, it has a lot of subtests that are implementing pretty simple scenarios. So some add risk, add role, some of them do modification of records like edit risk, edit role, and some of them are more complex. And the idea is to implement these building blocks and then run them in a more complex scenarios one by one. So if I will open a basic setup test on its RVL sheet, we may see that it simply calls our building blocks one by one. So first performing the login, then it adds products, then it adds a program, creates portfolio, creates some users. So this is the real life scenario, and probably every Spira test user will encounter this section. So we started from this kind of scenarios.
Right. So some of the key important areas that we want to focus on over here are some of my own lessons learned along with working with the team here. So one of the things that we often miss in automation is understanding the screen size. So I have certain screen resolution and the other person will have a different screen resolution where it will be running. So understanding the screen resolution so that you are figuring it out is very good. And this is when Dennis actually walked me through as to how to flash an object to make sure that what you see is what the actual automation engine will also see when running in a different environment. The second one that I learned here is starting and ending in the same place. So oftentimes I will start off with here is how you go from the main page to go to the admin section to add a new user and things like that. But then I will leave it exactly there. But in order for us to have this library of functions commonly working, Alexis suggested, like, start where you began, and then, after you are done with your work, come back where you originally started. That way there is going to be a final loop all the time. The third element that I actually really understood here is part of my own learning curve is being able to repeat the work. So initially, I will just go create a new test case and do something and send it to my team to say, this is working. And then another time it will be something else and that's not working. So different things are not necessarily good. So Alexei actually set me on the ground here and said, let's create a repeatable template block here. Once you have that repeatable template block, everything is captured. Now the difference is going to be whether you are adding a user or deleting a user, adding a role or deleting a role, or things like that. And that helped me move forward my process in terms of how to locate the X path, because oftentimes what you click is not necessarily going to be what the automation engine will create. An example, I create a new user. It's going to have its own specific user ID and password and role ID and things like that. But when I create a new user repeatably in an automation engine, it's not going to be the same ID. So I can use the same information. So trying to make sure that XPath is actually not having too much stickiness associated with the work so that it's repeatable. And the fourth one is the fail-proof way of selecting the items. You will see that there are, sometimes it's a new incident, sometimes it's called a new risk, sometimes it's a new test case, a new requirement. And so, every time you want to come back, I want to be able to, I went and asked Dennis, like, I want to be able to click on this particular location and the button can be called whatever, but I want to be able to say I'm clicking on a new requirement, or a new test case and things like that. And so Dennis built that library over here of all the functions so that I am calling these functions rather than recording screen events very sporadically and erratically. And another fifth element is going to be the remote functionality. So, I will test something, I will ship the code over to Dennis and Alexei, and they will look at this and they say it's working, but it's not working for me. So we were doing all kinds of remote sharing of work, but I had a different set of computers, he had a different set of computers. So we decided, let's put all our ideas together and created a virtual environment where we started working. So the time zone worked to our advantage. I will start the work, finish my work, and say, okay, here is what I have done. And Dennis and Alexei will pick it up from there and do all the triaging and help me resolve the problems, or identify other new functions and tell me, Sriram, I created this, move forward.
Yeah, right. And I want to emphasize one more time that we are not co-located and we have a time zone difference. And at the very beginning, it was very hard to synchronize our efforts. It means that when Sriram had some issues, we had to arrange sessions, and we are all busy with other work as well. And the project was pretty slow at the beginning, but at some point we decided that shared environment will dramatically help us, and we were right. With this virtual machine that you currently can see on the screen, Sriram worked on it to create tests, and when he hit some issues, we were able to log into this machine next day and see exactly the place and exactly the environment where something did not work. And it was very, very effective. And our fixes were immediately ready for Sriram next day to use. So if some function did not work in some specific case, then we just fixed this function and the environment was ready to move forward.
Actually, what we did is similar to what we see in other projects. In many cases, when we see a lead or new customer who is just evaluating, there is a guy who evaluates different automation tools. It may be a QA guy, or it may be even dev guy. It simply downloads several automation tools from internet and tries to automate something without like deep learning of the tool. And this is how evaluation is going. In our case, when we started, I was like that guy. So Shriram had knowledge about application. I had some knowledge about Rapise, and we tried to solve all problems using just Rapise. As I said, we have grids that are tricky and some like other parts. There are a couple more like funny controls. One is the text editor. One is text editor for editing comments, and it's widely used inside Spira. And second is, as I remember, checkbox editor with tricky switch lines. So it was like funny case, and in all these cases it was possible to find a workaround or automate them using just Rapise without writing functions. It's possible, but it's a bit time consuming, and when you have many grids of the same kind, it always makes sense to implement a function. And at this point, Dennis, as an expert in frameworks introduced, he wrote like a couple of dozens of functions that completely change on how this product, how Spira is automated. And it allowed us to speed up all the development.
Yeah, and along the way, when library became, started to contain dozens of functions, we created a GitHub repository that we are using internally. So I will show it on the screen. And this repository has the descriptions of all the functions and how to use them either in JavaScript or in RVL. And this is now a documentation for our framework, for our library. And if we will add more testers to our team, they will be able to start testing Spira rapidly and be involved in the project full speed. Also, I want to tell about the ending of this first stage. At the end of first stage, we had the library with the functions. We had, let me open the main test. We had the framework that contained many building blocks that are able to add some very basic things in Spira, like add product or edit role or something like that. And we also created a few scenarios that we use to demo the result to management. So, and I just show you this basic setup. And this was the scenario that marked the ending of the first stage. So it actually touched almost all the areas in Spira and did the basic smoke testing. And after we showed this, the management and other involved stakeholders, they came up with many other ideas how we may proceed with the testing of Spira. And I remember that Simon came up with an idea that it makes sense to do even more simple checks that are routine checks, and it is easy to automate them, and it is hard to perform them every time manually during manual testing. And those checks are like this. So open a specific artifact table, make sure that buttons with specific names are visible on the screen, make sure that some other UI elements are visible, and if we are going inside some artifact in Spira, in this case it is an incident, make sure that some tabs are displayed and other tabs are not displayed, and do the same for some required fields on the page. And we started moving in this direction, and to move forward effectively here, we also create a few functions. And I believe this is where we are now at the moment.
That is correct. Right now, after this demonstration, as Dennis mentioned, Simon provided some thoughts, and those two thoughts can be summarized in two aspects. First is going to be user interface. So before you start looking at the functionality, make sure that the user interface is expected to be the right interface. So making sure that the right tabs are visible. Don't need to create something at this point. Just make sure that the tabs are visible in the first place. Then the second thing is more of a negative testing. That is, with this particular right that I am logging in, I should not see this. So it's more of a not what you see, but also what you should not see. So those two are the scenarios. If I were categorize them, the other ideas that we are now working on is basically doing that. That's making sure that the visibility is there for the things that we want to see, and there is no visibility for the things that we don't want to see. Now that's going to be more repeatable automated test we can do, and then if you stack these things that we have already done on top of it, we are really creating a very powerful package of how we will continuously test our own products.
In most of the cases, people think that end-to-end testing is like implementing some scenario that a human will do. Adding some product, following some workflow, creating records, deleting something. And what Simon proposed is different. So it's not, it's about automation, but it's not about how humans use the system. But it really helps to automate very, very routine checks, and checking for presence of a button or some tab on the page is very fast, and it is Rapise does this much faster than a manual tester can do this. And I may say that since it is a routine check, it is a boring check. And when you need to manually check hundreds of buttons for presence or tabs for presence, you may be prone to human errors. So you may simply get tired and overlook something. And it is not the case when you are using test automation tool like Rapise.
Dennis, I think we may open in writing Rapise, we may open the test plan that's pushed and is available in the framework. It's in the root of the framework.
So you see the plan that we that I actually proposed, and although I proposed this, this was a team effort to make sure that we are putting it in a proper order. But as the product owner for this one, I was proposing this is the order in which we should be done. Based upon my domain knowledge. So what I created is basically the modules. So modules meaning like what are some of the things that is, we have 3 different editions of Spira. One is the Spira test, one is the Spira plan, team, and the other one is the Spira plan. So what are things that are applicable to all the modules, like all the 3 of them? And then
like
what are
logging.
some of, like logging in. So logging in here is applicable to all of them, right? But when you think about adding a program or adding a risk module, that applies only to Spira plan. If you look at a task, then it applies to Spira team and Spira plan. So, so the module is basically determining whether it is applicable to all of them or just only to some of them. That helped me prioritize, like, okay, I want to focus on some of those key things that will span across all the modules, and then focus on, building one by one. And then within each one of them, I started creating what is called the actual test that I wanted to do. So in column C, you are seeing like edit the release, edit the sprint. So you obviously want to make sure that you are following a structure, a process of how you want to do it. So I want to log in, and then I want to add a requirement. I want to do the release. And then only start thinking about other things like test cases and things like that. So what's the order next one? And my comment over here in column D is whether I'm done or not. So I use a simple Kanban approach, like, not started, work in progress, and done. And if it's marked in red, I had a question at that point. I think I have done everything that I think I can do at this point, but I am having a problem. It could be done better, or things like that. And Dennis will take a look at this and say, this looks good, but, this is can be modified here, or maybe you are creating multiple users here. We can use a map to iterate through this whole process and things of that nature. And then finally, things that I wanted to add as a check, like, okay, Dennis, can you please check this? If you look at this, I have a done and then a yes or a done and a check and things like that. So I used to go back to Dennis and say, please check this for more information. Is this something that we can add a function here to make it better, things of that nature. And then whether it is adding something or editing something. So I want to make sure that I'm adding first and then editing next and things like that. And then deleting things or viewing things and things like that. And my notes. So my first thing is updated. My first one, what are my immediate notes? And if you look at this, it's time-based. So if you look at some of those columns, like row number 15, column number G, you see on certain day I did this and the following day I did this. So it's more information is available there for us to go through the whole process. And Dennis will add his comments, I will add my comment, and we move forward. And as we were creating those packages of the scenario based, what are things that we are moving in? So which particular things are moving into which particular package? Is this really required, not required, with the function that we added? Should we go and revisit this test case and modify it to incorporate the functions that we have added and things of that nature? Finally, the actual file name, so that if you ever want to come back and revisit this as to whether it is properly checked into the GitHub and how we package them, we have all of those things as we build this. So that's how we built the project plan over here.
Yeah, and I may say that this plan helped a lot to coordinate our efforts. It is hard to use messengers when you are time zone separated, and using this Excel file, we were able to provide the feedback and organize our work. Also, I want to say here that after we implemented this workflow that runs our basic tests one by one, we put all this framework into Spira, and since then we are running these tests on every Spira build, and also we are running them on a regular daily basis. And this was our target from the very beginning.
What I wanted to comment here is you see that the work was done in many directions in parallel. So there was work on logging, there was work on editing a product or editing a program, and you see there was comments. So not everything was working perfectly from the beginning, but it was working to some extent, and the work was not blocked due to some missing feature. So the common mistake that we see that people start implementing some scenarios one by one, end to end, and they get stuck, say, on the scenario number 2, and put all their efforts trying to resolve that. So it's more effective if you see that something is not working end to end, leave it working somehow or skip it for now and proceed working to another scenario, because very similar scenarios may be very different from the automation point of view, and while one is easily automatable, another is total dead end. And if you just focus on it, you will lose a lot of time. So the right approach is to work on many things in parallel. In this case, you don't get stuck and you don't lose too much time. This was my comment here.
Yeah, one more feature of the framework is that we used different instances of Spira to run the tests. So Shriram has his own Spira instance, and we are using our own development Spira instance. And to quickly switch between them, we added support for configurations. And these configuration files with different names actually contain the URLs and credentials for Spira to login. And switching between those instances is simply uncommenting and commenting one line here in the library. And the whole framework will use a different instance of Spira. There is also a way to pass the value of this variable from Spira. So it means that using Spira configurations, we may specify different Spira test instances to run our tests against. And we may run our tests against different flavors of Spira, Spira Plan or Spira Test. So this is what helps us to run our test on different configurations of Spira and on different flavors of Spira. I think this is very handy and important.
And that is very helpful for us to check multiple things in multiple instances. So say, for instance, you are having Spira test on one particular instance and Spira team on a different machine, on a Spira plan on a different machine. We do a few little modifications and we use those parameters, and these things are already in Spira. And so we are using Spira, using Rapise to test Spira repeatedly on different machines with different scenarios. So that's very important to understand, because we want to make sure that we are putting them in a configurable way. Again, as I mentioned, repeatable way and configurable way to test different instances, rather than getting stuck on one thing that we want to do and not necessarily able to move forward, like Alexei was emphasizing.
Yeah, and while we have this library, and probably you have an impression that almost all steps should be now added manually when you have such a library. This is not true. And if we will go to some tests like add a product, where it is add a product, you may see here that a lot of actions were actually recorded, and they are present in the test as is. So most of the actions in this test were originally recorded, and they still remain. Also, in almost any building block in our testing framework, we have a cleanup sheet for every block. And the intention of this cleanup sheet is to delete the data from the system that was created during execution of the main RVL sheet of this building block. The idea of it is to clear all the data that is created during the test run. And since we do this right after test execution, our Spira instance is again ready for test run. This is good for development, at least. So I know that in production, every time we are running the test, we are having the clean Spira setup. But for development of tests in a framework, this is very handy and it saves a lot of time.
Probably it's good to look at one more aspect of the framework. So is there any data that is shared between different test cases, like IDs, project IDs, user IDs, names? Is there anything like that in this framework?
Yeah, there is something. So, for instance, when you are creating a user and you want to make sure that user is associated with a specific product, so you add a product and then you create a user, and now you are going and saying, like, now that the user is added, I want to associate the user with a specific product role or a product. So there are data dependencies, and that's one of the reasons why you need to insert them in the right order, because you cannot go and say I want to associate any user to this particular product when the user doesn't exist. So there are some dependencies, and that's all the more reason why the sequence in which we build really helped.
Yeah, and the framework is at the moment not data driven, and this is the plan for the future, to move all the hard-coded data values into Excel spreadsheets and use those spreadsheets during execution. This way we may use different sets of data for execution.
And one other thing I wanted to emphasize over here is one common thing that people miss out in automation, which at least it's my learning experience, is that the response time of the actual system. So if when you say I want to delete this and then click on the yes button that pops up, you can immediately expect this to move at the rate that you are moving or the time that you actually recorded. The response time when you hit the delete button for the pop-up to show up may be more. So you need to be gentle in expecting those uncertainties. And so we did build our own extra timing, additional time in terms of how long you wait before you actually record that it is a problem and things of that nature. So we did build those dependencies as well as so that we have a graceful shutdown rather than immediately calling it a bad.
Yeah, right. In most of the cases, default waiting between steps works well, but there are cases when some big bunch of data is loaded. We have to add additional delays to make sure that the data is loaded and we can work with this data.
As for data-driven, I think we didn't mention global set property, global get property. So add release uses release number.
Release number should be kind of a variable here, I think, and it should be loaded at the top. So here in the row 10, we are reading release number from the property file, and then we are changing it, increasing it by 1 and saving it to property file back. So this is to ensure that our test can be executed on the same instance of Spira, because every release that we create, even if we delete it, should have a different release number.
And in the edit user scenario, do we use the user that we previously created in add user?
The data is in RVL, so we have a similar table in add user as well.
So there is maybe one more thing that like summarize. So how long it takes to execute, something like that. How much time it's saved from compared to manual testing, what new features we get from the automation overall. So maybe like this kind of summary would be great. Okay.
Right. So I can maybe give two different summaries. So I will tell this. Okay. So when I normally get involved in testing some of these repeated functionalities that are being released, I spend anywhere between 4 to 6 hours on some of those basic things that we are doing, like adding a user, deleting a user, adding a release, associating a test case, and the whole 9 yards. I spend anywhere between 4 to 6 hours based upon the amount of functionality that is getting done. And that's just a standard things. It's not like testing new functionalities. It's like basic functionality that already should be existing, that we are not breaking in any shape or form. Now with this automation that we have built, pretty much that entire time is saved. That 4 to 6 hours for every release is pretty much saved, and we have this capability to run on a daily basis. So we are repeatedly checking the continuous integration, continuous building capabilities currently exist, and we are able to do that. From the learning perspective, some of the summaries, as I mentioned, is making sure that you have a plan to start with. So not everything that you want to automate should be automated. So go back to your MVP and start looking at this. And look at some of your own machine configurations, like the screen size, your waiting time that you normally respond. So if you are having a cloud instance where you are doing it may respond faster, or the latency may be different. So be conscious about those things, and making sure that you are starting with one area and then ending in the same area, so that these are automation. These are not manual testers that know where you are. So you want to start them and leave them back in the same position, and start with some repeatable template. So and I created the template. Add user, I inherited the template. I edit user, I inherited the template. So everything was basically doing the same thing. So I'm not trying to figure out what was this, what did I call that here, what did I call that over here. So it's not that. Next, make sure that there are some good reasons for creating library functions as well, because you don't want to create too many functions and there should be a reason, and make sure that you are able to work with the team in a way that the team is able to replicate the problem that you are seeing. Otherwise, everybody is wasting people's time. And finally, make sure that you are able to tell a story. Before the management, you should be able to say, I did this. Now, these are the main functionalities we have done. Is this right? Maybe, maybe not, because I started with some ideas of my own approaches and I learned a lot. We all learned a lot over here, but management came and said, can we do some of those user interface and negative testing and data-driven testing? Yes, all these things are ideas. Put them in the backlog, review them and prioritize them, and then keep moving. So the story of automation should be, are you able to save your time and company's time, and are you able to make sure that the product is of the quality that is expected, where it is not breaking, where it should not be breaking. The new functionalities really should not be actually breaking any of the existing functionalities. So the regression is working. So those are some of the key takeaways that I wanted to emphasize over here. And I can't thank Dennis and Alexei enough for making it happen for me.
Thank you, Shriram. And I just want to add about execution time for the test that we created. I remember that we filmed execution of our tests before presenting to management. And the building blocks that we created were executed for several minutes, as far as I remember. And I will probably put this film with execution of the tests at the end of this discussion. I will put it on air, so you will see how it works.
And I want to add about investment. So what we have now, we invested some time in having this automation. And at this point, if we started this project maybe 3 months ago, and as you say, you instead of spending 4 to 6 hours on running these tests, we may execute them automatically. But up to this point, we spent some more time on implementing this automation. But since this point, for every release, we have like 6 more hours that we may devote to other things, for example, to improve this automation. Also, we now have a possibility to have more frequent releases because we may run the tests faster. We may do some sort of DevOps transformation and have releases, for example, every week if we need it at some point. So we have new opportunities and new possibilities. Also, we have new types of testing, like this testing of presence of user control. So this testing is not just the same as it was manual, but it's in some aspects it's more comprehensive, and it's still executing in these few minutes. So that's why, even taking into account that we at this point spent some more time than we would spend on manual execution, in the longer run, this would give us much more benefits and will bring some savings compared to this repeated manual execution of the same over the all common releases.
Yeah, thanks, Alexei. I think this is a very, very good summary. So thanks, guys, for joining today. It was a great pleasure to talking to you. We put our story and filmed it, and we will be reviewing it from time to time. Thanks again. It was a great talk today, and see you next time.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Shriram. See you next time.
Thanks, Dennis. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Bye, guys.
So we may probably make 1 hour session. I think it's quite dense material. We could even publish it like with minimal corrections. Okay.
Yeah, it was easier than I expected actually.
Actually, this is much better than having PowerPoint slides. For this kind of thing, it's much better to do this talk rather than start with a PowerPoint and run through this,
And I think that at this point, this video, this is the one that took the less time than all other videos, because it was in one go. We didn't have a chance to edit anything, change anything. So probably we will edit it and make it available in a couple of hours. We'll just cut some pieces.
I will have to agree with that 100%. And we did not step on each other. It was very good talking stick approach. I gave it to you, you gave it to me, I gave it to you. It's just very good.